Hello, folks. Welcome once again to Empathize Others, the podcast. So we know that there's some really popular things out there with the youth. Sneakers, music, fashion, photography, social media. But that's not often the way they can get to those paths through our traditional school system. And so today we're going to talk to someone who is that bridge to make sure that our kids are engaged and able to make these opportunities and think about not just being a consumer of these goods, but helping to produce them and get into the industry. So we're going to talk to a community person, a change agent, but more than that, it's about his own journey, the risks that he took, the learning and opening to learning that happened to him that he uses in his everyday brilliance. So today we're going to talk to the vice president of Yellowbrick Partnerships, Dion Walcott. Community is centered to what we do here. We talk about how people engage with community, why they engage with community. Great conversation we're going to have today with someone that I, again, go back a long way with, but he's really engaged community in bridging. Today we're talking about a guy that bridges things. And so we're going to welcome to the podcast today, Dion Walcott, who's the vice president of partnerships with Yellowbrick. And, he's also a baller. He's also a community guy. He's also a Black tournament alumnus, and so Dion, I really want to welcome you to the show. And I'm so looking forward to picking your brain today.
No, Augy, man. Like you said, you reached out. I don't think we probably didn't even speak for probably a decade, but I know we're talking about community, but that's how important community is, because like once you have that connection, it's always a connection to reach back and try to do good work. So I appreciate you having me on your podcast, and anything I could do to share some words of wisdom, or as you call it, try to bridge the gap, I'm more than happy to do that today.
Well, that's perfect, Dion, because one of the things we pushed from the beginning of the podcast was people that are listening, we want them to learn more about you, of course, and I always want to highlight more so these community change agents. But then another thing is to get people to start to think about, gee, that's doable. I could do that too. That's not something that is, what Dion's doing is not so. We want to make it less big and make it more small. And I know you can appreciate it because you see that. So let's start out with this one, because we always kind of go in like a chronological way so that people get to know you as well. But when we talk about community, and I'll kind of lead you with questions through to where you are now, but your original community. So think about where you grew up and talk a little bit about that. And then if you could talk about too, Dion, when you started to get a sense that you were a part of a community.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I grew up in Toronto, in a neighborhood called Parkdale. It was a underserved community. Not a lot of resources at our disposal, but that's the whole thing about it. Like when you don't have certain things, you really have to lean on community, and that's what we built. We built a community of people who would look out for each other. You need a village to raise a family and kind of move forward. So from a very young age, I was very involved in the community in terms of like playing sports, and sports kind of guided me throughout my whole life. And then I didn't grow up with a father. So for me, I had a lot of different role models that are within the community that I had to take different things from, right? So like, a lot of people frown upon people that may be doing, things that aren't necessarily right in the community. There's drug dealers, there's basketball players, there's people who work 9-to-5 jobs. For me as a young person, what I was really good at is I learned to take a little bit from each person. Instead of looking at what the actions they were doing, I looked at the principles that they carried, right? And which principles that I thought was really, really good for me. And then that's what I kind of put inside of myself, and I use the community to build myself up versus like letting the community lead me astray or lead me right or wrong. I think every person in every community has its principles. And I grew up in a community that had some very strong principles, and
Yeah.
it's brought me here today. So yeah.
That's deep, brother, because I think about, who we rub elbows with, right? And I know
Hmm.
from the time I was young and growing up, I rubbed elbows with people that were good friends and partners who were,
Right.
let's say, on the wrong side of the law. But I
Right.
really that didn't bother me, right? Because that
Exactly.
was everyone wants that golden ring, and in capitalism, everyone wants to make a money. And
That's
so
it.
the way people made their
Exactly.
money was not so much my concern.
Right.
Growing up, I knew it was good for me. And it's funny how you said you picked the things that
Right.
you needed, right?
Right.
Because you obviously, even from the time I met you, I could tell you had a maturity and you had a vision and you tried to do things the right way. Because I'm a little bit older than you, and when I
Right.
first met you, and we'll get to that, but you
Yeah.
had this maturity, and now I can see the seeds of it was you were able to be in a tough area, but take the things and the wisdom that you needed. So I'm now going to bring you to where we kind of connect. So Sean
Right.
Parker,
Right.
people that don't know, basketball player from
Hmm.
Nova Scotia. Actually, I went to
Hmm.
St. Francis Xavier University, but the first African Nova Scotian to go to St. Francis
Well,
Xavier
Sean.
University was Sean Parker, and
Sean.
played
Okay.
on the junior national team.
Right.
Fantastic basketball player, but more than that, community guy. So he moves to
Absolutely.
Toronto. He ends up
Absolutely.
running some
The
programs at
YMCA.
YMCA downtown
Yep.
Toronto. And in a beautiful link, he says, "Hey, I'm Scotian, and there's a basketball tournament Victoria Day weekend in Nova
Right.
Scotia.
Hmm.
Which guys want to come down and ball?" And so he would put
Right.
together a team that was a combination of the guys from your run in Toronto and
Right.
us Scotians. And I met you there.
Right.
So
Right.
talk about first the
Well,
community that Sean was building at the Y, and then we
mhm.
got to get to the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Sean. He's an amazing human. He took, and a lot of people don't understand how that really came to be at the Y. Like, Sean was in Toronto and he's just playing basketball as just a basketball player who wanted to get a run. And because of how powerful he is as a human being, like he demanded a lot of attention on the court. And then it got to the point where, he went from playing to wanting to give back and help people upgrade their skills. And he would just do that out of the kindness of his heart. So it wasn't like he was working at the Y at the time. It was just like, I'm hooping and I'm busting you little guys' ass. But you know what? I could teach you guys how to do some stuff too. And he just
Yeah.
take that out of the own kindness of his heart. And then it became such a thing that, like, you know what? Like, the people at the Y were like, we got all kinds of kids showing up for you to train them and you don't work here. So like it started from, like, him just volunteering his time to them recognizing that, hey, you know what? This guy could really build community for us using basketball as that vehicle. One thing led to another. They gave him a full-time job, and I could literally, because I lived through the whole process with him. That basketball program wasn't doing anything at the time. No one used to come to the Y. Sean literally built that program from the bottom up. A lot of people from all over the city used to come there on Saturday and Thursdays for the best run in the city, and he did that from, like, not only basketball but from, like, caring for the young people that were coming to his gym, and providing them an outlet, and even just giving them some game about life that had nothing to do about basketball. For me, I was at a pivotal point where I was like, I wasn't really interested in school anymore because, like, I finished. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to university. I was pretty good with at basketball, but I was kind of like, it's not really taking me anywhere. So the Y was a safe haven for me at the time. And then me and Sean really just connected. And then that's when he started to talk to me about, like, you ever hear about the black tournament? And I was like, nah, I ain't never heard about that shit. And then he was like, well, he didn't even really tell me, like the whole background on it. He was just like, you should come play with me one time, then just come check it out. And I was like, all right, cool. I'll go with you. I trust you. And he's like, but we got to start training for it because it ain't no joke, right? So I was like, all right, cool, whatever. But in my head, I'm like, I'm just training for another tournament that, like, you go play in the summer, right? But then, like, he started getting serious about it. Like, hey, every twice a week we got to get in the gym, and we did that for probably about 4 months. And then I could honestly, Augie, tell you the honest truth. Like, I jumped on that plane and I didn't know what to expect because it was just me and Sean. right? Like, remember, Sean, what? Sean got about what, 10, 12 years on me at the time. So
Yeah.
I'm jumping on a plane with my mentor to go play in a tournament, and all we do is play at the local Y. So like now I'm out there in Halifax by myself, and the only other connection I got is Sean. So I remember the first time we all met up, and I was like the youngest kid on the team, and I was kind of like, man, this tournament kind of crazy because it started on, I think, a Wednesday, and I had
Yeah.
never started. Yeah, then you play from Wednesday straight all the way through, right? And like
Yeah.
you guys were men, right? So like I think that's important because like I was a young person, Sean was my mentor, but like I had a different connection with him. And then to throw a young kid, I think I was 17 at the time, into a pool of men who knew what the fuck they were doing all the time. It was intimidating just to play with you guys, right? But then you guys were already rocking and rolling. Then I was the Toronto kid at that. And then once I started getting my confidence and we start playing, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
sports breaks all the barriers, right?
Yeah.
And then it just became like kind of like a brotherhood. And I remember, I think we lost. No, it wasn't that year. Wasn't the year we won. It was the first year that came down. We lost and St. Patrick's Alexandra, and we lost against North Preston. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I think at the time, this is a funny story because Sean always laughs about it. Is we finished the game, we were all tired, and Stevie D says, "So Dion, what you drinking?" And I was so young at the time, I was like, "Oh, I think I'm gonna have some juice." And he's like, "Oh, you want juice? So we'll get 10 beers and one box of juice for Dion." And I'll never forget that because I was like, that's how young I was at the time. But the cool part about that was like I had a cool experience because I was around men who understood how to, handle themselves in pressure situations through sport. But then even off the court, they showed me an example of like, this is how you carry yourself. And I don't take that for granted because for me, that was like you said earlier, was the seed to start a lot of different things for me because I ended up going to Halifax to go to school. And, I have a
Yeah.
very fond place of Halifax because Halifax has kind of like helped me build the man I am today. So that was the
It's
crazy
great to hear
part.
that your side. I smile so much, Dion, to hear your side of that story because of what I will say is that the energy that Sean Parker was bringing to that Scotian energy is a
Right,
collective energy, right? Like we
right,
all kind of roll like that. So,
right,
when you came into our thing, it was a young guy, but we never made you feel small. We never made you
right,
feel.
right,
And I remember as the tournament got on, and for those people that don't know, this tournament had different levels: A level, B level, C level.
right,
There was
right,
hundreds of players. It was like a homecoming car show,
right,
fashion show,
right,
food truck show, and so there was a lot going on. So now when I see how you came from your perspective, we just invited you in. It was a
right,
community
right,
vibe.
right,
But really, if it was negative, it could have been negative for you to come all the way from Toronto because certain teams were coming with 12 guys strong,
right, right.
but you were coming really trusting Sean. But Sean was
Exactly.
bringing you to Wade Smith, myself, Mark
Yeah,
Parker,
yeah,
Stevie
yeah,
Day,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like
We had a
bringing you
good
to
little
a
school. We had an
bed.
amazing squad.
Yeah, but we were going to take care of you, right? We
Right,
weren't going to
right.
make you feel small. And
But
then
I
as
think
the
what
tournament
was
went on,
I
because
think
you
what
go
was
ahead.
I think what was interesting because like well, like you said, you have your perspective as like men who are going to mentor this young kid, and then there's the kid's perspective of like, hey, I'm getting on a plane. Like you got to also remember, I grew up in Parkdale. That's a hood. So like, for me to leave my hood and get on a plane to go play
Yeah,
basketball without any of my friends, that's like taking a fish out of water for me,
yeah.
right? So like, in my Sean's cool, like yo, we're cool, but Sean's home. I'm not home, right? Like he's
That's true.
home. So you know what I mean? So like my hood instincts automatically kick in, right? So it's just like, whoa, hold on a second. Like I'm 2 hour flight away from like my neighborhood, and my only resource I have is Sean Parker. And I
Good
gave
point.
him all the trust, you know what I mean? But like I remember the flip side of that, I remember coming back to Toronto, and when I came home, all my homies were hanging out in front of my building, and they were all like, "Yo, how was that tournament, man?" Like everyone was excited, right? So like, then I kind of told them the whole experience, and but what we didn't realize at the time was like the work you guys did with me to give me the confidence to play well, for me to go home to share the story with everybody else, that was actually the bridge, as we were talking about earlier, that started a lot of people from like the community wanting to go to Halifax. Because after that, Sean started bringing teams from Toronto,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't because I think there was 2 years where like, well, actually, I think there was 1 year where I played, and the next year I played with y'all again, and we won. But then teams started coming from Toronto. But like the real pipeline to start that kind of journey for other teams was because of you guys and the work that you guys did with me. And then it kind of just spiraled into like Halifax has the best tournament in Canada, and you've seen a whole bunch of other teams. Sean started bringing teams, other players start building their own teams, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. So, we don't even look at the work we do sometimes. You just do it, and I take my hat off to y'all because you guys made sure I had a positive experience. I came back home and shared that positive experience with everybody else, and then it trickled into like hundreds of people having that same experience over a long period of time.
But you're hitting on something so beautifully essential, Dion, because when you came and were playing, and even from Sean, and they're just being themselves. I'm being
Right.
myself. Wade's being himself, but yet you felt comfortable, and it was outside your realm. And what it goes to show you is that is community work, is it not?
Mhm.
If you're being
Absolutely.
positive and you're supporting people and helping them go beyond stretch beyond their comfort zone, right? Then
Right.
it becomes
Absolutely.
exponential, because if you think about, now Sean works with a group called 902 Man Up, which is about
Okay.
helping the Black youth in inner city Halifax. So he's being exponential again. But we're going to get
Got
to
you.
you, what you're doing now, which is exponential. I'm also
Right.
doing stuff. Wade did
Right.
stuff.
Right.
There's so many ways that if you're a community person, it goes way beyond yourself. And so
Absolutely.
I'd like to
Absolutely.
circle back to what you said about growing up in Parkdale, where oftentimes the irony of growing up in what people may call, housing, or, that concrete jungle, etc., is you're
Right.
forced to be
Right.
community. Because when you have that
Right.
big old house, and you have your big lawn and fence around, and it's just your family, and you may decide yes or no whether you want to deal with other people. When you grow up in the
Absolutely.
hood, you have no choice but to deal with other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
community vibes
Absolutely.
are kind of forced upon you, but there's a
Absolutely.
beauty to that, because you're forced to work with people. So this is the other
Right.
thing that's great, is things happen that you didn't expect to happen. So while you were playing and balling out with us, the coach from Dalhousie was watching you play. So the local
Right.
university coaches used to come to that tournament. And so
Right.
now,
Right.
talk to that transition, because it's cool. I love the story you're telling, because you're balling with Sean in Toronto. You don't know what your future is in basketball. You go to this tournament not expecting anything. Like, yeah, Sean, I
Right.
trust you. Let's
Right.
go.
Right.
Little did you
Yeah.
know that you were being watched. So now talk about what is the next phase for you as far as getting to Dalhousie University.
Well, it's funny. So like I came home and Sean, there was a few coaches that were interested, and Sean was like, "So what is your plan? Like, what do you want to do? Are you interested in going to school, or like are you gonna go work?" Because that's kind of where the path where I was going. Like, man, I'm just hanging out. Let me just go to work. And he was like, you have opportunity to really maybe go to school and like get an education, right? And at that time, I was kind of like, man, I don't know, because like you're hanging with your friends and your priorities are messed up. And then, Tim McGarrigle, I have a lot of respect for him. He had actually came to Toronto at a run at the Y, and I was super out of shape. And he was like, if you thought about, going to school, maybe come to Dalhousie to go to school. And I think it was like in September that he came. And I think I was like 15, 20 pounds overweight. And he was just like, you put on a little bit of weight since the tournament. I could see you've been hanging out. But like, even though you put on the weight, you still killing people out here. So, you should probably think about, you to take your talent and if anything, just use it to get an education. And I was like, I was looking around of like, my homies and the people I'm hanging around with and what I was doing. Then I was like, you know what? Maybe I will take the risk again, right? Because it really was a risk for me, like going with Sean. But now it's like a risk again, trusting a coach that I don't really know to go into a city that I don't really know with nobody from my area going with me again. And then I started getting real serious about it, and I actually left at Christmas time to go to Dalhousie, right?
Yeah.
And I got to redshirt with the team, so I got to get a little bit more accustomed to how things would work, and then I would start my first year in September. And the real cool part was, I remember going to the airport, and Sean dropped me off, because Sean was pretty much my father figure for my whole high school career. And he pretty much said to me, like, I've done my part now, like, the only time you could call me is if it's life or death. The rest you got to figure out on your own. Right. And I remember I was mad confused, because I was like, what kind of send off is that, man? Right? Like, only call me if it's life or death. Yeah, you on your own now, like, see you later. And it was like, all right, cool. And I remember taking that flight and landing in Dalhousie, in Halifax. And then, I think I stayed at Miss Parker's, God rest her soul, for probably 3 or 4 months, at Rebecca Parker's house. And just
Yeah.
being, again, out of, like, people don't understand it, because, like, a lot of players too, like, you come from a particular community that you're safe with, and that you know where everything is. And in the dead of winter, like, I got to figure out how to get to school. Like, never mind, like, basketball. You know what I'm saying? I don't know where Dalhousie is, right? Like, I got off a plane, someone drove me to Miss Parker's house, and then tomorrow I'm supposed to be in the gym. I don't even know where the gym at, right? So, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, in my mind, I'm like, I got all kinds of stuff I got to figure out that has nothing to do with why I'm here. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people don't understand that, because, like, that's cool if you lived on campus, because you could figure that out. But, like, I'm living I'm living in Miss Parker's house, which
In
is across town
Creighton
in the
Street.
hood. Yeah, in the hood. So I got to
Yeah.
figure out how I'm going to get from here. And then, like, because of how I grew up, like, I'm walking to Dalhousie every day. So I'm also walking across, like, seeing different things, like seeing the transition from, like, hold on now, like, there's a lot of Black people when I left the house. Then I crossed the commons, and I don't see no Black people no more. Hold on a sec. Like, all of those things you're processing, and the conversations I'm having on one side of the city versus the other side. Then when you go to the gym, and remember, I'm from Toronto, so I have a different perspective as it is, right? Because, like, the way our communities, it's not necessarily, there's not a white line down the middle of the city where it's, here's what here looks like, here's what here looks like. So for me, I'm used to, like, even though we grew up in the hood, it looks very different, and the community's built very different. So
Yeah.
all these little tiny things, I don't even know if, like, the coaches understand that, right? Because, like,
It's a good point.
from, for me to walk from Miss Parker's house to Dalhousie gym and back for 2 months, like, the things I gotta process is crazy. And I'm calling my man in Toronto, like, yo, listen, bro, like, I went up to, like, I'll never forget this. I walked across the street, and a car stopped, and I was like, yo, is someone about to get shot? Because, like, in my neighborhood, a car stopped 5 cars down from you, and there's no one in front. That's a signal. That's a problem. And
Run.
that's in my mind. I'm like, hold on a second. Like, that's a danger sign. I got to keep pushing. Then the person opened their window and told me to cross the street, like, a nice gesture. And I remember I called home that night, like, yo, my boy Rock. I was like, Rock, you won't believe what happened to me today, man. Like, 5 cars down the street, someone stopped and told me to cross the street, yo. And he was like, what? What do you mean? Like, and everything's all like, he was dumbfounded, because in our neighborhood, like, ain't no one there's no nice. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you crossing the
Yeah.
street, you taking a risk, right? Like, you're not taking the crosswalk, then you're at risk, because someone's trying to get somewhere. They ain't stopping the car for you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so, and then that became part of my DNA. Like, you're like, okay, like, people are genuinely nice here,
Yes.
right? Like, I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, like, I grew up in a neighborhood, like, that doesn't happen. Like, that will never happen. You know, it's like, no one will ever stop their car for you to cross the road, ever.
That's a culture shock thing, or a culture shift. And it's interesting that from the time you dipped your toe in Scotia, there was there was, and I know a lot of Americans will talk about this too, whether they're black or white around,
Right.
but especially black Americans around coming here as
Mhm.
athletes, mostly that's my connection,
Right.
um,
Right.
and it being less intense. And there's something true about that because we have to agree that Scotia is more rural and more old school than Montreal, than Toronto, than Calgary,
Absolutely.
etc. But there's a beauty to that, and I own my Scotianness. I know I got a little bit of
Absolutely.
country in me. I know I got a little bit of, but there's a humanity that exists because we're not a big metropolis. So that's in your learnings. So now as you go to Dow and you're playing ball, I really want to shift so that we can get into, because
Right.
there's so many connections around you're growing. What you
Right.
see as your role, like I can be good to people. I don't need to
Right.
be, yeah. So as you're doing that, you get into sociology at
Right.
Dow.
Right.
um, School becomes, it seems as though school becomes more important than you ever probably thought it would be.
Well,
What
you
things
know,
around,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No,
Go.
it's good because what things shifted for you? Because if we go back in the story, you weren't even sure if you wanted to go to school. Now you're at
Yeah.
Dow, you're learning on your way, you're learning so many things, but there's something that has to be happening in the classroom too.
You know what? I'll say this. Like, I wouldn't say necessarily it was happening in the classroom, and I'll say this 1,000 times over because, like, I'm cool with like going to school, but like, what was really impressive to me more so was like learning to learn. The environment
Uh,
of learning is what I got hungry for. Right? It wasn't necessarily the classroom. It was like, hold on, like even taking that crossing the street story, it was like, hold on, like there's a whole other world out here, right?
yeah,
Cool. Well, I'm in an environment that's teaching me how to learn. Okay, what
yeah.
else can I learn here? And that's when I started getting hungry because it was more like, hold on, I got access to like people that I'm never going to probably be able to meet if I was in Toronto, right? Like I got a person who wants to teach me, so I could ask them questions and they have to answer me. That's a whole different ballgame, right? So it wasn't the
And you're
classroom
hitting on
per se.
something too, though, Dion, around learning is an open concept, right? You've got to open yourself. So if you're in
Yep,
Parkdale, it's dangerous to open yourself, right?
yep,
It's better to be. You got to keep yourself tight in order
yeah,
to
yep,
survive. So it's interesting that you say that there's something that happened to you, even your community, your vision of what's learning and what is community started to open. And I'm glad that
definitely.
it isn't just about classroom because we're going to get there. Because when
Right.
we talk about Yellowbrick, it's not about the classroom necessarily,
It's
right?
not. It's not.
Learning
It's
goes on
not.
all over the place.
And I
So now,
think that
as you're going through Dow,
from
'cause I want to try
okay.
to get, what are some of the changes in your thinking now around what you think your future is going to be?
I mean, the changes in my thinking is really like, and I know we're going to go into this deeper, is like I have way more two things that I pretty much hang my hat on every day is it gave me access and it gave me awareness to like things that I never actually knew existed. Right. So
Mm,
like now I'm in a class with, a guy that's saying to me, all I got to do is graduate and I'll never have to work another day in my life. In my head, I'm like, word? Like, I've never heard that in my life. What? All you gotta do is get a piece of paper and you're good for life? Like, that type of access to be able to even understand that exists, that
yeah,
opens my brain to other possibilities, right? And then the awareness of it is like, wow, like this environment right here, um, there's so much learning just being here that, and this is not a shot at anybody. It's like the environment I grew up in, there's a ceiling, because of people are trying to survive. A part of survival in the hood is like, food and shelter. You can't dream about breaking through a ceiling if you don't got food and shelter. So like
mm,
your food and shelter is gonna be the ceiling. So like if I'm making sure my family can eat and they got a roof over their head and sometimes we have a good time, that's the ceiling. But how are you going to break through that ceiling if that's what you're trying to get through every day? Then
yeah,
you remove me from survival to put me in a situation of trying to thrive. All of a
mm.
sudden, that ceiling looks completely different,
That's
right? So
brilliant.
I'm
Yeah,
like, I'm like,
yeah,
wow, okay, cool. Like, you mean, even if I don't get this piece of paper, like when I go back home, the guy that used to say, you can't do that, I could say to him, yes, you can. Right?
yeah,
I could
yeah,
prove to you you can. and that's the beginning of it all. And you know, I literally, that's the work that I do every day, where it's like, how do we provide access and awareness that's super important to me, to our communities, because it's not talent. We have the talent, right? But sometimes the talent doesn't have the opportunity. So like you said
Uh,
earlier, like, you know, the bridge, how do we start to build bridges for the talent to get the opportunity, you know? And the bridge comes with a lot of different things, you know, like different barriers that we need to remove. And, you know, I lived through that at Dalhousie, where it's like, I remember I didn't even know what an email was when I went to Dow, right? And like a good friend
Crazy.
of mine, yeah, and I'm in university. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm in university, and one of my classmates taught me what an email was. And I remember thinking to myself, like, if I don't know what an email is, imagine what my homies back home don't know. Cause like, I just learned that I'm in university. Like, they don't care about an email back home. But like, think about how that connective tissue changed a lot of other things for me personally. So that
Well, no,
housing, you know, like, you've been crazy.
this, one of the things I love about this conversation, Dion, is I've known you for a long time, and I was on the outside watching you do this great work that was giving access and opportunity to kids and to do things that they really wanted to do, right? And so we
Mhm,
want to
mhm.
get to, as you go home, because I do want to get to the concept of
Right,
yellow brick, and if you could
right.
talk a little bit about that. And I know we're skipping over some of the
Yeah, yeah,
things that you done when you first got back to Toronto around, kids and kicks and things like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but talk a little bit about the concept of yellow brick, because there's some things that you already spoke to, and
Hmm.
I love this conversation, brother, because you're giving me how you got there. I didn't even know how
Right.
you got there. I'm seeing how you got there. So we got
Yeah.
urban kids who might have limited senses of what their opportunities are and what they can do. And yet, from the way you blossomed, that there's way more beyond your own scope if you have a couple people in your life that are able to open up your thinking. So you got that.
Absolutely.
So now you're becoming a bridge person, because you come with this, and I love that it's more of a community thing, because many times in this podcast you said, and I thought about my fellas. I thought about my, like, if I don't know,
Right.
then, so that's a community think, right? So then when you
For
get
sure.
home, you're now starting to see that, because we know that urban culture is sexy and attractive, and it's
Of course.
appropriated and stolen and all of that. We know that we
Hmm.
got the type of swagger that people want to sell and use for commercials and use for sneakers and use for
Absolutely.
gear. Da, da, da. So now it seems to me is that you realize that you need to take that and make our kids or urban kids realize that those industries could be a part of them. So talk a bit about yellow brick and
Yeah,
that
no, I think
concept.
that's exactly, you just hit the nail on the head. It's like, after years of doing all creative stuff with community, like, you know, I did a lot of work within the sneaker industry and using sneakers as an engagement tool, work with a lot of different artists. But what I realized after being in the sneaker industry, or I should call it like contemporary culture industry, is that, you know, there's a lot of uh, brands who love us as consumers, right? So if I take the sneaker industry, for example, every brand loves, you know, a black dollar as a consumer, because like you just said, we drive culture, right? Like, we're the drivers of culture. But that's from a consumer side. But when you start getting into the building, what you realize is that, you know, the same messages that they use for you to spend your money, or could be the same messages they use to show you different career opportunities. So what I got real interested in was like, hold on a second, like, I'm doing all this work and it's fun, but every time I go into meetings, I'm not seeing anybody that looks like me, right? And not necessarily even at a high level, just on a normal level, where like the only time I'm seeing you is on an ad, or like, you know, as they call it, you know, the assets. So like, an asset is, you know, a young black kid. They call us an asset, because like,
Wow.
without the young black kid, you can't drive. You're not gonna make no money, right? So like, what Yellow Brick, you know, has done, you know, created as an ed tech platform where it gives you, I call it a little bit more of a sexier guidance counselor course, where you always heard about sneakers, but you only hear about sneakers from the consumer side. So what Yellowbrick
Mm,
now is doing is like, here's a course that gives you an opportunity to actually explore what the sneaker industry looks like, because there may be other jobs inside of that industry that you'll be attracted to that you didn't even know existed, right? So it gives you access and awareness again through these courses to understand, okay, well, listen, you know what? Like, I really like sneakers, or I really like streetwear, music, film, photography, all of these things. We usually see the checkered line, which is like the product at the end, but no one
yeah,
ever sees under the line where it's like, there's a product manager that you're managing all the product. That's a really good job, right? Like
yes, yeah,
there's a location scout, right? Like for photography, right? Like, and that job is like for someone who loves to travel. And like these things really align with like people and what they actually enjoy doing. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a social media manager. There's a kid right now in the hood, I guarantee you, who has 20,000 followers, and he or she doesn't even know that like that's an actual job,
yeah.
right? Like you could be
That
getting
they're
paid to.
influencers.
Yeah, that you're, and not even influencers, like your strategy on how you get people to like you. People are getting
Yes.
paid thousands of dollars in a boardroom to do what you're thinking about naturally. But like, if
And
you
I do
don't
want
know
to make
that,
this point too, Dion, because you and I
Mhm.
talked about this when I first phoned you and wanted to invite you to the podcast.
Yeah,
Like me being in education, we
hmm
know that in 2021, some of the linear ways that we've done education does not fit for people. And
right,
university
right,
would be an example. Not everyone needs
yeah,
to spend 20 grand or over 4 years to get a Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts. So one of the great things about Yellowbrick too is, and I want to bring this to the podcast listeners, is that once you do the curriculum, there are internships attached to it,
right,
which
right,
means that you have a chance to skip the spending of money. And these
right,
companies have made a link to say, hey, you have someone that you trust, that Dion, you're connected to. They've done the program. We know that they have the skills. So let's
right,
just skip the whole university thing and get them in a low level job at Adidas, a low level job at Nike, or and so a music industry job, a fashion industry job. And so
and
there's something brilliant about that, because if the golden ring is to get a good job, then it doesn't have to happen. Graduate from grade 12, go to university for 4 years, get a master's degree, come out and be unemployed. Like that's a lot of
yeah,
money. So talk about that too.
I think that I would correct you in that, not saying get rid of university. I think what we want to do is challenge corporations to now be alternative education.
Good
So,
point.
because I'm not saying education is not important. I think that a lot of times
Not either. I
someone,
do want to go. I
no, no,
wouldn't
I
have a
know
job.
because I know that people will just, oh, university. No, no, no. That's not what, I don't think that's what either of us are saying. I think that
True.
corporations need to realize that like the people you have in your building can also be educators and help people who may not
Wow.
want to go in through the system of education. They want to go through the system of corporation. And that's
Yes.
actually a good route, because corporations now get rid of all of the filters that universities mess your brain up with, and they can teach you how to work at Adidas, right? Like, and
Well,
that's the
McDonald's
amazing.
does that. There's already corporations that
Right,
train people in like McDonald's University or whatever, right?
right. So I think, right now we're doing a program with Reebok where there's 50 students. They get a scholarship. It's an 8-week program. They get to meet people from Reebok every weekend, and they're working on a product in the background that's going to eventually be made and sold through a store. For me,
Yeah.
it's less about like, don't go to university, and more about like, here's some options. If university is one of them, here's 2 or 3 other ways to get
Nice.
educated, right?
Right.
And out of those 50, one may say, you know what, nah, man, I want to go to university. But now when I go to university, I know what exactly I'm going to university for, right?
Mhm.
I think that's the difference, because like everyone goes to university because we've been conditioned to say like, go to university, that's the next natural step. You go there and you take, arts. And it's like, okay, what is that going to really do for you though?
Yeah.
Right? You're just
Especially in
following the system.
2021.
Yeah, you're just following the system. So like,
Yeah.
what's important to me is like, let's give our young people options of like, not saying university not important, but if you're going to go to the university or college route, know what you're going there to do. And if that's not you, then you know what? Maybe I could help you get into a job directly and they could teach you how to be a location scout the way they want you to, right? And
Yes.
you're going to work your way up that way. So, you have a different path. And I think that's the most important part. That's what Yellowbrick is providing, that entry point to the access and awareness.
No, listen, brother. I think I applaud you in the story. You have me so full with energy and gratitude around knowing your journey and I'm glad that we captured it on a podcast so many other people can hear about it because it speaks to growth, it speaks to learning, it speaks to
Mhm.
being dedicated to the community. Um, as you said, you had a lot of people that filled in as your father figure, Sean being
Right.
one of them. But you can still make it, and you can still make a difference no matter what your circumstances are and you're an example of that. And you and I have a lot of work to do together, going forward
Yeah, no, for
because we
sure.
we are linked that way. But
And I
go
think
go ahead.
one point I'd love to just, I know you work at the board. We've talked about education. I think that it is super important to like start getting programs like the Yellow Bricks in some of these, formative years, because like that's where all the work is going to get done, right? Like a lot of times, like right now, our program that we're doing with Reebok, 17 to 21, which is amazing, right? But if
Yes,
you're thinking about, someone who's in grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, if they're getting fed that information, then like you're now talking about changing how your whole community looks like
yes.
versus like, the last lap, right? Where it's like, nah, I have no choice. So like that's why, and then you and me had a good conversation about like how do we start thinking about getting programs like Yellow Brick or alternative education programs into like schools. I think that's the
Early.
natural next. Early, for sure.
Well, we're gonna, brother. You're preaching to the converted, and it helps community. It helps all kinds of communities. So I want to thank you again for such a beautiful talk and you sharing your journey. Because as you share your journey, there is going to be someone that picks something out from it that motivates them and makes them want to
Absolutely.
go forward and give and grow and be open. And also, what I want to say to the people is, the Dion Walcott story is a lot about taking risks too, right? Taking
Right.
risks to come to the black tournament, taking risks to come to Dalhousie, taking risks to go into an industry that was not a hot button, like it was an industry that you almost had to create and be a part of.
Right.
So I love that
Right.
part of your journey. I want to thank you so much, brother. What a great conversation, and we're gonna have to have you back because we got
Yeah,
other
for
things that
sure.
are gonna grow. We'll have you
We
back.
got like you said, we got some work to do, and Halifax has a real place in my heart, and I'd love to see if we can make something happen. Some of the stuff that we talked about. But like I said, man, it's all about awareness and access. And happy to be on your podcast, and hopefully people picked up a couple gems and it helps them do whatever they need to try to get done to move forward.
Of course. Stay blessed, brother.
You too, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching this episode of Empathize Others, the podcast. We hope that you really enjoyed the show. If you're enjoying the podcast series overall, as much as we enjoy making it, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow, and when you subscribe, you'll know right away when our new episodes are released.